The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, let's get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Matt Heemstra. I'm a partner at Kane Ellsworth & Company. We are very grateful that you've taken time to be here today. Our purpose is just to spend a few minutes talking about the Academy for Excellence in Leadership, to talk a little bit about leadership development, why it matters so much for community banks, and our proposed solution for that. Out of respect for everybody's time, we're going to limit this to no more than 45 minutes. I know you've all got a lot of things to do. If you have questions as we go, we'll try to have some time at the end to answer some of those. Please type them into the questions section on your GoToWebinar screen. Like I said, whatever time there is at the end, I'll be happy to try to answer those. If we run out of time, then we'll be happy to answer those via email afterwards. So let's go ahead and get started. Just some kind of random thoughts about leadership and about leadership development and about where we are. With baby boomers nearing the end of their careers, I think everybody knows this is not just a community bank issue, but leadership development is a huge issue for banks in particular. And beyond just the banks, it's really about the communities where those banks function. Our communities have to have, it's not negotiable, they have to have a successful, growing, active community bank, or those communities just dry up. The community banks, the local community bank presence, it drives economic development. They control the capital in the town. A lack of community bank isn't the only issue that our communities face, but it's to me the foundational issue. Without that kind of a community bank presence, it's a pretty bleak situation, and we're losing nationwide hundreds of community banks each year. Pardon me. And it's not generally because they're unprofitable or struggling financially. There is some of that, but more often it's because there just really isn't anybody who's capable of leading that bank going forward. And when I say leading, I don't just mean bank presidents. We have a lot of conversations with bankers where they'll say, well, we've taken care of leadership development because we've identified who the next president is. Well, that's great. Just because you've identified them doesn't mean they're ready. But beyond that, we have leaders throughout banks that aren't just the bank president. It could be the head teller. It could be the loan officers. It could be people regardless of title. We have people in all of our organizations who are leaders, even though you wouldn't know it by looking at the organizational chart. And we're going to be losing many of those people too over the next 5, 10, 15 years. It's critical for our communities that we're actively working to fill those gaps. We can't just hope it works out. We can't just maybe try something and see what happens. We have to actively be pursuing that. And one of our concerns for our communities is that we haven't taken that seriously enough. And I don't mean that we're lazy or that we don't care. That's not it at all. But I just think we've been too casual. I think people will send people to a seminar, we'll send people to a webinar, we'll send people, have them do some online course, go to a conference, but that's it. And then we can't figure out why we don't have enough leaders. Worse than that, we have too many community banks who think that it just happens by osmosis. So-and-so has been in the bank a long time, they've been around other leaders, it's just common sense, they'll be able to figure it out. That's false. Leadership is not just common sense. Leadership skills are like any other skills. They have to be learned and they have to be developed. And we can't just take it for granted that that's going to happen. And not even just mediocre leaders. The goal of this program, the goal of the Academy for Excellence in Leadership is not just to get people to the point where they're warm bodies who can fill a leadership role. We want to help create the best leaders the bank has ever had, ever. And that's a big goal, but our communities deserve that from us. They deserve better than just whatever we feel like putting the effort into or mediocre. They deserve the best leaders that the bank has ever had. Kind of along those lines, there's a lot of things out there in terms of leadership, and this slide isn't directed at any particular leadership development program. It's not intended to badmouth anybody. It's just general observations we've made about leadership development, and this isn't necessarily unique to community banks, but it fits there too. One of the weaknesses that a lot of leadership programs have is they ask too little of the participants. People have to be stretched to grow. There is no growth that happens in our comfort zones. And so we have too many leadership development programs where people are allowed to be comfortable, and then afterwards we can't figure out why we didn't get the growth we wanted. There are too many leadership programs that create a disconnect from the business. A lot of programs, you send people off to a conference room by themselves, and they do some stuff by themselves or listen to something by themselves. Nobody really knows what they're doing. Nobody really knows what they're listening to. Nobody really knows what the program is. and then they go back to work, and then that's it. You can't isolate people from the bank. You can't develop leadership skills in a vacuum. That training, that leadership development has to be connected to the bank, to the business. A lot of leadership development, there's learning experiences in big chunks a few times a year, but there's only so much that our brains can retain, and we won't retain much at all if there isn't the opportunity to apply some of that learning. So it's hard to have the desired growth we want. A lot of leadership programs focus more on doing than becoming. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Then a lot of them are expensive, and part of that's true because we don't just have one person who needs to be a leader in an organization. We have lots. You think about community banks, even in a small community bank, and I'm thinking of some very small ones, there are still at least 2 or 3 or 4 people who are bank leaders. And larger banks could have 10 or more. And that just ends up being pretty costly for community banks. And so a lot of programs struggle with those things. And again, that's not about any specific program. There's just some comments on what we've noted in general, and part of what motivated us in this direction. One other thing that I think is relevant, we think banks should be doing most of their own leadership training. In an ideal world, the best training is internal. You understand your own situation, your own circumstances, your own people. But the reality is that's just not going to happen most of the time. I know a lot of bank leaders who would like to do something like that, but they just don't have the capacity. They just don't have the time, the direction, whatever it is. And it's not really anybody's fault, but it's just hard for them to do. And so you end up either with something internal that's mediocre or something external that struggles in the ways we mentioned on the previous slide. We owe it to our communities to do better than that. That's why this matters. If our communities are going to thrive, are going to grow, are going to prosper, they need that successful local community bank presence. And this isn't something we can just leave to chance. So that's all those things together kind of drove us to where we are today. So for the rest of the time, for the next 35 minutes or whatever we have left, this is what it'll look like. We'll talk a little bit about principles of leadership development, kind of things that we think are important, things that we think need to be part of any exceptional leadership development program. We'll have 8 or 9 points of those. We'll talk a little bit about the Academy for Excellence in Leadership then. We won't get into every minute detail, but we have 8 or 9 key things we just want to point out so you get a feel for what that looks like, and to get a feel for what it would be like to be a participant in that program. We'll talk through some key dates, kind of a scheduling, what that looks like going forward. And then, like I said, whatever we have time for in terms of questions and answers at the end, we'll answer as many things as we possibly can. So please enter those in the questions section as we go. So let's talk about principles of leadership development, things that we think are really critical. One of those things is an exceptional leadership development program has to focus on helping participants become high-yield, low-maintenance leaders. And you'll hear us say that over and over again in the Academy. And it's true. This is really what we're trying to accomplish. We want to help create and develop the best leaders the bank has ever had. Part of that isn't just about being high yield or high performance. It's about being low maintenance as well. Most organizations, and this goes beyond banks, but I've seen it in banks as well, most organizations have leaders who perform at a high level, but they're constantly using up other leaders' time, other leaders' energy. Maybe they don't play nice with the other kids. Maybe they don't model the culture. Maybe they just do whatever they want because they're a big deal and so forth. If you're really going to have an exceptional leadership development program, it can't just be about high performance. It has to be about low maintenance. So we're going to try to turn out high yield, low maintenance leaders. Learning has to be delivered in continuous, digestible doses. If you want continuous, ongoing development, then you have to provide continuous, ongoing learning. You can't have huge amounts of learning followed by huge gaps. It just doesn't work. It has to be in chunks people can handle and throughout the year. People have to be able to apply what they learn. Most knowledge, most education, most learning is use it or lose it. I would be embarrassed to name or to count the number of conferences or webinars that I've either attended or sat in on or some other kind of educational event, and it's great, and I think, wow, this is fantastic. And then I go back to the office, and a few months later, I'm cleaning off my desk, and I find the materials from that conference or from that webinar, and I don't even remember that I went. And we have a lot of that. We have a lot of education that is great at the time, but there's no follow-up, there's no application, and that just ends up being a waste. If learning and development is going to take place, especially if you want that development to be somewhat rapid, then there has to be application. You can't just learn and then walk away from it. There has to be a way to apply that. We also think pretty strongly that when you're talking about leadership development in community bank leaders have to be involved in that for a couple of reasons. One is to make sure that the training and the education, the development that people are getting is connected to the bank. Remember, I said you can't just put people in a conference room somewhere and turn them loose. There's got to be some involvement with what's actually going on in the bank today. The other reason bank leaders need to be involved, current bank leaders need to be involved, is it provides some internal accountability. Accountability is difficult anyway. Accountability in terms of leadership development is particularly difficult because, to be honest, it's a little more intangible. There aren't necessarily a whole bunch of reports you can do to show that you're developing as a leader. So it provides some internal measure, some internal way to keep focus and to keep people on task. That really, from an external standpoint, it would be hard for us to provide that. There's got to be some internal leadership involvement. I think it's important that any program has to be appropriately demanding of participants. I said this already once, I'll probably say it 3 or 4 more times over the next 30 minutes. All growth comes outside of comfort zones. There is no exception. If we are comfortable, we are not growing, regardless of the situation. Too many educational events and conferences are comfortable. People aren't really pushed. You have to push people. Now, there's a balance. You can't bury them. We understand the people who might be in any kind of leadership program already have full-time jobs. It's not like they don't have anything else to do, but it needs to be demanding. People need to be stretched and challenged. And that learning, that stretching and challenging needs to be customizable. You can't just have a blanket cookie cutter program for everyone. Not everybody at the bank is on the same job path, same career path. Not everybody at the bank has the same skills or capabilities. Not everybody at the bank is passionate about the same stuff. So there has to be, to some degree, a way to customize that learning experience to what the individual needs and to what the bank needs. Every community bank is in a little bit different situation. And so that learning has to be flexible and customizable. Somehow you have to be able to measure progress. Are people actually learning anything? Are people gaining confidence? Are people gaining skills? Do we see a difference in their behavior, their performance at the bank? It's not enough to just say, yeah, I went to a webinar, okay, great. How are we going to measure that something is happening, something is changing in terms of how they perform and how they behave? I think it's important that a program has to be affordable and not require a lot of travel. Now, that's not necessarily a COVID-19 thing, although that's maybe more relevant now than it would have been a year ago, or hopefully will be a year from now. But travel is just extremely costly. And not only in terms of mileage or airfare or hotels or meals or all those kinds of things, but time. The amount of time we spend in a car, the amount of time we spend in an airport, the amount of time we spend in an airplane, it's a huge expense. These are our best people that are in programs like this. What could they be doing with all that time if they weren't spending it on the road? I just use myself as an example, and I'm not bragging or condemning anything, but just the reality is if you look at the amount of time I spent behind the wheel of a car last year, and the amount of miles I drove, assuming I drove the speed limit, which is another webinar probably, but I spent about the equivalent of 6 weeks in my car last year. What could I have done with that time? What could people do with that time? How can we develop people without them having to go somewhere and take all that time on a regular basis? Now, that said, it's also important, I think, that participants do need to be able to network with other leaders. So there is a balance. It can't just be that you're hiding out at the bank all the time. There is value in networking, not only with other leaders, but with other great leaders. And I guess I would phrase it this way. If a bank thinks that someone is worth putting in this program, then chances are that's a person worth getting to know. Those are not just run-of-the-mill bankers. These are the best of the best, and those are people worth knowing as emerging leaders. So those are just some things we think of in terms of leadership development that are critical, that any excellent leadership development program has to have some piece of that. And so now as we talk about the Academy for Excellence in Leadership, if you're paying attention, you'll see that the way this is structured is designed to try to address all those things. And again, I'm not going to go into minute detail on every single piece, but I want you to get a feel for what it's like to be a participant in this program. And to start, I just want to give a little background, pardon me, of how we got here. Our firm, Kane Ellsworth & Company, has worked with community banks for over 50 years. And the issues that community banks face are always changing, always evolving. But over the past probably 5 to 10 years, but in particular the last 5 years, we've really seen the development of leaders become a bigger and bigger issue at the community bank level. And we have done leadership development for a long time, both with banks and with other clients. But we've done leadership development work for a long time in kind of a one-off situation, a bank here, a bank there, that kind of thing. And we've gradually felt over the last few years more and more strongly that one-offs aren't going to do it. There are too many communities that need too much from their community bank for us to just kind of occasionally do some leadership development work with a bank. We really felt like it needed something stronger, more specific, more broad-based. So while we're having those conversations and trying to figure out what that might look like, as chance or fate or luck or destiny, whatever word you like, would have it, we were approached in late 2019, so towards the end of last year, by an organization called Upstream Academy. Upstream Academy does training and development kinds of things for CPA firms, including leadership development like this. They've done it for years. Thousands of people have gone through their leadership development program from hundreds of CPA firms. It's kind of the gold standard in that industry in terms of leadership development. And we're fortunate enough to have a relationship with them. We've used some of their various programs. We've had people in some of their training and development things. And they approached us and they said, do you guys see a need for leadership development at the community bank level? And if so, would you guys be interested in filling that need? And of course, it was perfect timing. We've been talking about similar kinds of things. Absolutely, we'd love to do that. So we took what they've done for CPA firms for years, for thousands of people, adjusted it for community banks, tweaked it for community banks, tweaked it based on our firm's philosophy about leadership development and what we see as important for community banks and our mindset, and it fits what we do perfectly. We're excited about it because it's a world-class level program in our minds at the community bank level, and we don't have to make it up as we go. It's phenomenal. So we're excited. I know it sounds like we're just tooting our own horn, but we're pumped. So let's talk about it. Number one, and we'll talk about, like I said, there are 8 or 9 of these things. Number one, each participant in the Academy for Excellence in Leadership will have a guide. So that guide needs to be some respected leader in the bank. It could be the bank president, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, now if it's the bank president, that would certainly give an indication to everyone how important this is to the entire bank, how important these people are. That guide's role is to help the participants with goals, projects, help hold them accountable, and we'll explain some of that stuff later. But it's really to help keep that participant on track and make sure that they're getting out of this what they need to get out of it. Now, if you're a guide, you can guide more than one participant. So let's say as a bank you have 2 people, 3 people, 5 people that you think want to be part of this program. You can have a guide for more than one person. I would say if you're going to have more than a handful, it would be hard to be a guide for a large number of people. So perhaps you have more than one guide, but a bank leader can guide more than one participant. As I said, the guide will work with those participants, that participant throughout the program, help them set and accomplish goals, complete assignments. We do provide guidance and support for guides and advocates, and I'll talk about advocates in a minute. We do provide training for the guides. Shortly after the program begins in September, there's an introductory webinar for guides. After the program begins, we'll go about a month, and then we'll start having webinars every few months. There's 3 of them throughout the year for our guides. And really what it is coaching training. It's really about coaching training. It's really what should they do to make sure that this program is having the impact on their people that they want it to have. So we provide that for guides, because the reality is just because you're already in a leadership role and you're already an existing leader in a bank doesn't mean you're necessarily a spectacular coach. And we just want to make sure to give you some support as you help those participants through that program. Like I said, the guide's primary role is to hold the participant accountable for accomplishing tasks, goals, assignments throughout the 3-year program, and we'll talk more about those things later. I had mentioned on the previous slide advocates. The idea of an advocate is simply someone to administer the program internally. So let's say you have 1 participant and 1 guide. Well, if that's the case, the guide can probably handle it. But if you have multiple guides, multiple participants, it's helpful to have an advocate who just kind of makes sure everybody knows when the webinars are. Everybody remembers their password to get into the online platform, which we'll talk about later. Everybody's got their goals selected for the month. Everybody's got their projects selected for the year. Everybody's meeting with their guides. Just from a 50,000-foot view to make sure things are running smoothly within the bank. Again, if you have one participant and one guide, the guide can handle that. But when you start to have multiple people, multiple guides, all that kind of thing, then having someone whose role is just to administer things within the bank, kind of the go-to person. Hey, I forgot when the next webinar is. Hey, I can't find this. Someone who's able to just kind of answer those simple questions and then keep things moving within the bank is pretty helpful. So it's not mandatory, but as you add more people and have more involvement, it's definitely beneficial. So every participant will have a guide. Then all the participants will have leadership training forums. Now, leadership training forums are 1-hour webinars. There are 8 of them throughout the program year. So September, October, November, December, February, March, April, and May. They're an hour at the most, usually probably just a little bit less than that. And one of 4 people at our firm will lead those webinars: Kevin Kane, Stacey Dykstra, myself, Julie Noble. Each of those forums addresses a specific leadership topic. They're all something different. There are no repeats in there. Everyone who's a participant in the program in the academy will receive a PDF of the presentation. We send out some discussion questions. We send out any other materials. Like I said, every forum is a little different, so that each forum might have something unique that comes along with it. We do record each of those forums. We will record each of those forums. Participants will have access to those forums online afterwards via our online performance tracking system. We'll talk more about the OPT a little bit later. I want to take just a few minutes to walk through what those topics are. I'm not going to go into much detail at all. Most of them are very self-explanatory. You'll read the title and know what it is. But just to give you a feel for what those topics are and what kinds of things we cover over the 3-year period, and each year is a little bit different. The first year is around personal effectiveness and customer management. So yourself as a leader, understanding yourself as a leader, and what does that mean in terms of you and customers? I know sometimes people in banks say, well, I don't deal with customers, or that's not a big part of my role. If you're a leader in a bank, you deal with customers, period. Whether you realize it or not, everybody's a little bit different. Not everybody has the same interaction or the same contact or same kinds of things, but it's relevant for every leader in a community bank. So the first year we have things like time management, capitalizing on your strengths and talents, controlling your weaknesses, setting and accomplishing goals, exceptional customer service, a handful of others. Remember, each of those is an hour long throughout the year, once a month. The second year changed gears a little bit, and it's around team development and business development. And again, I'll say the same thing about business development. Some people think that that's the job of 1 or 2 people in the community bank. That's false. Everybody is responsible for business development in a community bank, especially leaders. What exactly that looks like for everybody will be different. Everybody needs to figure out what that means for them, but it's relevant for everybody. So that second year is things like feedback, delegation, performance evaluations, coaching, business development plans, and a handful of other ones. And that's the second year. The third year is a little bit broader, leadership principles and change. So some of these sound a little more hard to understand what they are, but personal example, that's pretty straightforward. Bad habits of good leaders, driving change in your bank, contributions to bank success. There's just a little bit higher level things in that year, just kind of all right, now you're ready to go sort of stuff. Guides are welcome to sit in on these webinars. They don't have to, but guides at least need to know what's going on, which is why we recommend that participants and their guides get together on at least a monthly basis. You can do more often than that if you like, but at least a monthly basis, and discuss that month's webinar, that month's goals. And like I said, we send out discussion questions for people to consider just to get the conversation started. But the guides need to know what's going on. So each participant has a guide. Each participant is involved in 8 webinars a year for those 3 years throughout the program year. The next piece of that, the goals. If you recall, I've mentioned a couple times, there's not a lot of learning if you can't apply it. And so each month, following each leadership training forum, each individual participant will set a goal to be met before the next forum. So you have a month to accomplish it. The guides will help them figure out what those are. But this is a really critical part of the Academy. You can listen to webinars, you can read PowerPoint slides, you can do whatever else you want, but you really won't develop skills without applying it, without doing some of it. And this is part of the doing. So each month we will provide a list of potential goals to everyone, to all the participants. Participants will choose a goal. It doesn't have to be from that list. We want this to be flexible. We want this to be customizable. We want this to be tailored to each situation, to each person, to each bank. So if you come up with a goal on your own each month, that's fantastic. I'm sure it would be more relevant than the more general goals we come up with. But we do provide a list of potential goals, just because I know sometimes it's hard to sit down after a webinar and conjure up some goals. But the participants, with the help of their guides, will select a goal each month to be completed before the next forum. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands these goals are not intended to take days and days to complete. Okay, we're not going to have a week of work every month between webinars. Maybe an hour or two every month would be appropriate. And we want these goals to be things that will benefit the bank. We don't want people just doing random things just to do them. We want these things to be not only applying the learning and helping the participants grow, but things that the bank will actually benefit from. All right. Again, these are not intended to be PhD level goals every single month. Each one should take an hour or two. If it's taken a lot longer than that, you probably need to back off a little bit. Okay, so each participant will have a guide. There'll be 8 webinars throughout the year. We have a goal after each one for that next month. And then over the course of the program year, so from September to May, that's 9 months. Over the course of that program year, each participant will complete a little more challenging leadership project. And it's a little more involved, and I just want to talk briefly about what that means, what that might look like, because it's just a little more to it than just the monthly goals. A good project for the participants should, number one, stretch their abilities. We talked about comfort zones. We'll just keep talking about it. It should stretch their abilities. It should be specific. It should benefit the bank. I said that about the goals. That should be even more true here. It should be measurable. It should have a time frame. The time frame is May, but it should have a clear idea of when we're going to have this done. What are the steps? The idea behind this project is that it should take at least 10 hours to complete, but certainly not 40. 10, 12, 15 hours, and you've probably got something pretty good. We will send out some example projects. We will send out some things you could choose from. Once again, it's far more effective if each participant in their guide select a project that is specific to your bank and to your situation. It's much more relevant if it's something that you understand your own circumstances. The things we'll send out they'll be good projects, but they'll be pretty general. So the more you can tailor it to your people and your location, your community, your bank, the better. I want to talk briefly, what do we mean by stretch the participants' abilities? Just as you're thinking about what a project might look like and what that might mean if you're part of this program, we're talking about stretching abilities. That means, for one thing, it's not something that's been done before. If we're talking about a task the participant does on a regular basis or has done 10 times already, that's not what we're thinking. Okay, that's not a project in terms of what we're thinking about. It needs to be something that's not easy. It needs to be something that wasn't already going to be done in the normal course of things. So if it's something that's already on your to-do list for this year, don't just all of a sudden say, I guess that's my project. Okay, it's got to be something you weren't already going to do. It needs to take the participants' best effort. Again, it can't be easy. It's got to push people. It's got to push them to the edge, and I would say beyond the edge of their comfort zone. For the 4th or 5th time, no learning happens inside our comfort zones. All learning, all growth happens outside of comfort zones. And so any good project needs to push people outside of those zones. Now, we've talked about guides, about webinars, about goals, about projects. That's a lot of stuff. How are we going to monitor that? How are we going to measure that? We will provide and have created an online platform. That platform will track everything that's going on. It'll track all the information from throughout the program, throughout the year, throughout all 3 years. We call it the online performance tracker. Each participant, each guide, each advocate, if you have one, gets unique login. You can get on the website and all this stuff will be there. So what it's really about is helping participants and guides stay organized. So all the course materials will be there. Recordings of all the forums will be there. All the discussion questions will be there. All the guide training will be there. When you set goals each month, you'll document them there. When you complete them, you'll check them off there. When you determine what a project's going to be each year, you'll document it there. You'll document your progress regularly, and then you'll check it off when you're done there. All that stuff is going to be, it's essentially our online warehouse for information. And there's a couple reasons for doing that. One is just to keep everything in one place. If we were trying to manage all this via emails or we'd house a bunch of video links somewhere else. Well, then you got to go there, or we send you links to this or that. It just becomes a lot. It's a lot to manage. And in one place, it's easier to track everything. And honestly, it's easier for us. If we were requiring you to tell us about your goals every month and send us an email for your project, and that ends up just being a massive amount of stuff back and forth. This way, everything's in one place. We can see it. You can see it. Each participant can only see their stuff. So you can't go look at everybody else's projects or everybody else's goals or those kinds of things. I would encourage, if you have multiple participants from a bank, that it's probably valuable for those participants to share their stuff with each other. That's fine. But on the online platform, everybody can see only their own stuff. When you register for the program, you'll get some information about that in more detail. Sometimes when you talk about online platforms and online performance tracking and all that kind of thing, it makes people a little nervous. What I would say is this: the online performance tracking platform, we're a CPA firm and we think it's pretty easy to use. So if the CPAs can figure it out, I'm pretty sure everybody else can too. It's really very straightforward, and it's just a nice way to house everything in one place, keep everybody organized and on track. The next piece of that, so we've got webinars, we've got goals, we've got projects, we've got all that stuff. Then there's a networking piece, and I'm going to talk about these next two slides as is, and then I'll probably take a few minutes and just update, because we're living in a different kind of world. It's important to network with peers, particularly if you're a future bank leader. You have the opportunity to network with leaders who are doing similar things to what you're doing, perhaps even in similar areas of the bank, and there's value in that. We talked about that earlier. There's value in being around great leaders. If a bank thinks someone is worth putting in this program, then that's probably a person worth getting to know. And so every year we'll have a conference, and we call it the Excellence in Leadership Conference. This year's conference is scheduled for January 28 and 29 in Tempe, Arizona. It's a day and a half. It's all day on the 28th and the morning on the 29th. And the conference really serves two purposes. One is education. I mean, we'll have speakers and different topics and all those kinds of things. But the other is the networking and the interaction piece. So we'll have a couple speakers that probably just speak, but most of the time, the topics we have will be, we'll talk a little, and then people will work in small groups. And then we'll talk a little bit more, and they'll discuss things in small groups. And then we'll change the groups around and do it again, just to get people an opportunity, not just in random social networking, which is fine, but in work-related, leadership development-related networking, to really get to know people, really get to hear about their situations, and get to learn from each other. There's no extra cost for the conference in terms of registration or anything like that. That's part of the investment you make up front. You do have to pay to get yourself there, and your lodging and a few meals. We provide breakfast both days, snacks both days, lunch on the first day. We have drinks and hors d'oeuvres on the first day. Whatever meals you get at the airport or somewhere else, those are on your own. But those are your only additional costs. So that's the actual slide. Now the update. As of right now, this is still the plan. We know that the world we live in, having conferences and having people fly somewhere for a conference isn't happening very often, and maybe it won't happen in January either. I have a hard enough time trying to figure out what's going to happen next week, never mind 4 or 5 months from now. At some point in early or mid-fall, we will decide whether this is going to happen as scheduled. And when we make that decision, we will let people know. We'd like to make that decision, if possible, early enough that it doesn't negatively impact anybody. What we don't want is you come up with a bunch of travel arrangements, make your hotel reservation, and the day before we cancel it, and now you're stuck with something you maybe can't get out of. So we don't want to do that. That said, the reality is just nobody knows these days what's going to happen from one day or 1 week or 1 month to the next. So our goal is to make a decision on that by this fall. If we do cancel the in-person part of the conference, we will have a virtual conference. We're working out the details of how exactly that'll go. And so when we make that decision, if we have to make that decision, we'll communicate what that'll look like and how exactly that'll work. So hopefully this is the only year we ever have to have this conversation. Hopefully every year going forward, we just have the conference, and it's a big part of what we do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about us. You can go on our website, excellence.training, to check out our bios. It's excellence.training, no www, no .com. The one thing I'll say about Kevin and Stacy and Julie and myself, we are extraordinarily passionate about how important community banks are to your communities. I don't know how I can communicate that with any more with any more true belief than that. And we all spend our time and energy to a large degree with community banks and their leaders, trying to prepare those banks to have an impact for years and decades to come. So it always feels a little weird to toot our own horns about us individually, so you can read more about us, but the four of us will be primarily delivering most of this program. Another thing we always mention to people, and in my time at Kane Ellsworth, I'm not sure that I've ever, that this has ever been relevant, but it's good for people to know. Everything we do at our firm is unconditionally guaranteed. So if you enroll in the program and partway through you decide, yeah, this isn't for us, I don't think this is worth the money, we give you your money back, or you pay what you think it was worth, and that's that. When you sign up, when you register for this, it's not some kind of legally binding 3-year contract that you're on the hook no matter what. If you don't think it's valuable, if you don't think you're getting your money's worth, we give you your money back. Now, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I expect that anybody who registers for this program is going to be thrilled to pay for it, that it's going to be some of the best money you spend every year. But it's worth throwing out there just in case something happens, something goes wrong, somebody's not a fit, whatever. That is out there, and that's part of what we do with everything as a firm. Which brings us to the 9th point, the investment. If you register prior to September 1st, the investment for each participant is $3,600 per person per year. After September 1st, that goes up a little bit, and that's just an administrative thing. If everybody signed up 2 days before the first webinar, it would be an administrative nightmare, trying to get that sorted through, trying to get links out, information out. So there really isn't a deadline. You can sign up anytime you want, but after September 1st, the investment is a little bit larger. And that's all your cost outside of travel and lodging and a handful of meals. That's the event, that's the webinars, that's the goals, all that stuff is included in that investment. Now we have about 6 or 8 minutes left. I want to very briefly talk through some key dates. I'm not going to ask you to memorize any of this. You should have received a PDF of these slides with the invite. If you didn't, we'll send it out, or we'll send it out anyway. But I just want to talk through this so you get a feel for kind of the time frame and how that works. Said before, the registration deadline, which isn't really a deadline, September 1st. We have forums beginning September 23rd. The first leadership training forum is 10 a.m. Central Time on September 23rd. And of course, October, November, December, the conference in January, or a virtual conference if it comes to that. And then February, March, April, May. At the bottom, you'll see, as I mentioned, we have an intro webinar for new guides in October, and then 3 more throughout the year. So you get a feel for that. Now, questions and answers, and I have a handful here that I just want to talk through. Before I do that, just in case I run out of time and I'm not paying attention, if you have any questions and you didn't post them, that's fine. If you have any questions that come up later, please feel free to email any one of us or call any one of us. We want to make sure that whatever questions you have get answered. If you posted some and we don't answer them right now, we'll try to answer them via email shortly after this webinar is over. But there's just a handful of things. One of the questions here is, how much time might a person expect to spend if they're enrolled, if you're a participant in this program? My answer to that would be, let's think through all the pieces. You have from September to May, so that's 9 months. You have 8 webinars that are an hour each. We expect each participant to meet with their guide for 30 to 60 minutes each month. Each month you'll have a goal that should take 1 to 2 hours. And then over the course of that 9 months, you'll have a project that takes 10, 12, at most 15 hours. If you add all that up, it works out to somewhere between 40 and 50 hours a year, not counting the conference. So if you think about 40 to 50 hours over a 9-month period, that's 4 or 5 hours a month. And I don't think that's too much to ask people for leadership development in terms of getting people ready to have the impact on their communities that they're going to have. I know it's not nothing, but we really tried to make this as impactful as possible without having it be an overwhelming amount of time. So long-winded answer to a short question, I would say 4 to 5 hours a month is a pretty reasonable expectation. Another question: who's a fit? Who's a fit for this program? I would answer that by saying anybody who is, or in the next 5 years will be, in a leadership role in the bank. So I don't think age is relevant. I don't really think experience is relevant. There's another question here about bank knowledge. I don't think that's relevant. This isn't the Graduate School of Banking. We're not going to talk about Y9s or Y6s or call reports or all those kinds of things. This is about leadership development. If you have an individual that is either in a leadership role now or will be in the next 5 years, then they're a fit. Again, I don't think age matters. I don't think any of that kind of thing matters. So again, then another question was about bank knowledge. I don't think you need to be a loan officer. I don't think you need to be a teller. I don't think you need to be the bank president. I think you can be any one of those things or more and be a fit for this program. So we're just a little bit out of time, so I'm going to stop there. Just want to thank everybody for taking the time to do this, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching a recording of it. Really consider whether the Academy for Excellence in Leadership could have an impact on your community. It's not just the bank. I mean, the bank is the vehicle, but what we're really trying to do is have an impact on those communities that you serve, and I think this is a great way to do that. Thanks again for taking the time to be part of this. We look forward to visiting with everybody soon. Have a great day, and thank you very much.